My boyfriend insisted that I donate blood for my best friend, even though I was pregnant and anemic. He said it wasn't a big deal. When I was 2 months pregnant, Julian asked me to give his childhood friend a blood transfusion. I refused because I was anemic, but his friends all said I was ignoring the whole situation, and is in the operating theater and you are the only one with a matching blood type. What's wrong with giving a little blood? After they saw that, several of them grabbed me and pushed me in. A fleeting moment of compassion. I stayed alone in hospital for 3 days after the operation. Julian stayed by Anne's side the whole time. My womb was empty, but the pain pierced my heart. I met Julian, Anne, and many of his friends. When I was discharged, I carried my rucksack alone, but Anne had Julian to help her walk. Julian stopped for a moment when he saw me. "Why are you still in hospital?" I hid the miscarriage and walked out the door with a pale face. "We'll go together," he said. He grabbed my arm, and in a tone that left no room for argument, and quickly got into the passenger seat. When we reached the car, then she said, Scarlett with an innocent expression and sparkling eyes, "I have just had an operation for an ulcer and I get carsick easily. Could you please let me have this seat?" I didn't argue and opened the back door, but his friends all rushed in. Now there were 3 grown men squeezing into the back seat at once. They stared at me with hostility. "Scarlett, Anna, still weak. We're all coming to your house to look after her." I looked at Julian in the driver's seat. His face was stiff, but he didn't say a word to contradict her. I smiled bitterly as the sound of filled the air. How could I have any expectations of this man? Julian's friends hated me. They thought he was for Anne and saw me as a scoundrel. I tried to break them up. They treated me like a servant in my own house. Julian never defended me, not even when I was pregnant with his child. I still had to give Anna a blood transfusion. They didn't even thank me at the end. They just said it was an honor. It wasn't the first time I'd been abused, but it was the first time I decided to take it without a fight. Fine, I'll go home alone. I closed the car door and walked out first. It was rush hour, so I couldn't even get a taxi. As someone who had recently had an abortion, I wanted to walk home for an hour in the scorching heat. I was greeted with harsh complaints as I pushed the door open. "Scarlett, why are you so slow? We've been home for ages. We haven't eaten all night. Come on, let's try your cooking again." I looked at Julian and Anne. It was a hot summer's day, and the air conditioning was off, because they didn't want the fragile Anne to catch a cold. Julian sat next to her, fanning her with a paper fan. Although he was starting to sweat himself, he ignored it all and continued to fondle Anne. Sam shouted when she saw I was quiet. Julian was starving. "Tell your wife to cook us something to eat." Julian finally looked up. He ordered casually, not noticing how pale I was. "Scarlett, go and cook us something simple to eat. And make some soup for Anne. It'll help her recover." A sharp needle pierced my heart. It made it hard to breathe. I turned and walked into the kitchen. I tried to block out their happy voices. I argued with them hysterically, as if it could restore my dignity. But I didn't realize my outbursts only fueled their arrogance, and was always patient and different from my childish nature. But I've had enough. These people, this relationship is not worth the energy. I was exhausted by the time I got the food out and offered to help, but she recoiled when I handed her the soup. The chicken soup spilled all over the floor, and the bowl shattered into countless pieces. "Watch out," Julian quickly shielded Anne. But a large patch of my bare calf turned red from the scalding liquid. "Scarlett, I know you don't like me, but you didn't have to drop the bowl on purpose." Even though not a single drop of soup fell on her, threw herself into Julian's arms and acted like she had been wronged. "That's right, what are you doing, Scarlett? You have been after him for so long. We're all just friends. Why are you acting like this?" I cast a cold. I looked at the people who were chastising me and spoke calmly. "Quiet." Julian cut them off before they could say more. Scarlett, apologize. You went too far this time. She had just come out of hospital and you scared her. Even though it was a hot summer's day, I shivered uncontrollably, as if I had fallen into a cold cave. The searing pain in my calf was nothing compared to the agony in my heart. The man who once given me a sense of security and strength now seemed like an executioner, cutting me to pieces. The last threat in my mind was gone. I'll apologize. I left bitter tears welling up in my eyes. Julian was taken aback for a moment and tried to reach out to me, but I avoided him. Dinner is ready and I've apologized. When I went to my room to bandage my burn, I shook the blistered skin. I hoped he would finally leave me alone. Having said that, I ignored the mess and went back to my room. There was a lot of noise at the door, and I heard Anne's hurt voice. I'm sorry, it's all my fault that Scarlett's upset. I am such a jinx. I shouldn't cause you any more trouble. I heard the door open as Anne ran out, and everyone running after her worried. The door slammed shut with a deafening noise. I thought Julian was following her. He pushed the door open and walked in. He hugged me from behind, and his big hand stroked my stomach. Scarlett, why can't you just give in to her? Anne is still a child. You have to be more understanding. Besides, we're going to have a baby. As soon as I've sorted out work, I'll make it up to you with a proper wedding. Don't be angry, okay? His voice was unexpectedly soft, with a hint of coaxing. Oh, so you do remember I'm pregnant? I pushed his hand away and couldn't help but sneer. Julian's smile froze as his bone jingled in his pocket. He picked it up, and Sam's boys rang loudly in the quiet room. Julian rushed over and fainted on the way. And we still need someone to pay for the hospital bills. Julian grabbed the bank card, which we had all saved from the bedside table. Without hesitation, "Are you out of your mind, Julian?" I angrily blocked his path. "You want to take the money we have saved for our baby, just to pay for Anne?" His eyes darkened in frustration, and he stormed out anyway. Of my obstruction. Enough, Scarlett summons. Lives are at stake, and all you care about is your petty nonsense. Stop being so selfish. I tapped him desperately on the shoulder, but he was so strong he pulled me from the room. Selfish? She's your childhood friend, not mine. Why should I spend my money on her? Julian seemed to be angry about something I had said and, like an angry leopard, the broken glass on the floor hadn't been cleaned up, and my exhausted body collapsed onto them. Pain shot through my body as I raised my hand to find my back and arms covered in cuts. Julian has already left without even looking back at me. Staring at my bloody hands, I used the last of my strength to call for an ambulance. Before I blacked out, in the haze of unconsciousness, I dreamed of the little boy he used to be, the one who climbed the hill with me to hunt in the old church. He clasped his hands together, his expression devout. I'll protect Scarlett all my life. If I ever break this vow, may I meet a terrible end. When I awoke, it was late at night. I was the only one in the darkened ward. A nurse came in. She gave me a glass of water and helped me to sit up. I looked at my bandaged arms and couldn't help but sigh. Miss, you have just had an abortion, and now you are like this again. Please take care of yourself and rest more. I closed my eyes. I let the bitterness and pain wash over me. After a few quiet thoughts, I opened my phone. The first thing I saw was a message from Sam on his feet. In fact, only Julian cares about Anne. The photo was of Julian sitting on a hospital bed. At the same time, Anne was resting her head on his lap, smiling happily and contentedly. A scumbag and a shameless woman. No wonder people say they're made for each other. The pain in my chest turned to numbness. I forced myself to push the sadness aside. Do they deserve my tears or my pain? I logged on to my mobile banking and checked my account. The $14 I had saved for myself was still there. I calmly transferred the money to my account. My marriage to Julian had also ended. With the loss of this child, I called the manager and asked Miss Lily, is there still a for me to be transferred to the head office? I was offered a promotion to head office, because of my excellent work. I turned it down a week ago, because I was pregnant and didn't want to be separated from Julian. Now none of that mattered. Scarlett, weren't you pregnant? Don't worry about work right now. Get some rest and take care of yourself. There will be other opportunities in the future. When I hear Lily's soft voice, I take a deep breath. I call myself Miss Lily. I lost the baby to return to work as soon as possible. There was a brief silence on the other end. Before she spoke, I'll put your name back on the list. Losing a child is no small matter. Rest for a week and then report to headquarters. I agreed quietly, my voice shaking a little. Thank you, Miss Lily. During my week in hospital, Julian never came to visit. He didn't even realize I was still pregnant. I was so surprised. That was just the way he was. I used to make excuses for him all the time, but not anymore. After a week of rest, my body had recovered enough for me to be discharged. During this time, I scrolled through in social media. Every single post was about Julian in the photos, and looking like a little, surrounded by admirers. She was always the center of attention, with nutritious meals and countless gifts. Meanwhile, I was alone in the hospital with nothing. Not even the pearl necklace Julian had promised to buy me, now hung around Anne's neck. It was strange to see these things, and feeling absolutely nothing. When I got home, it was just as I'd left it. Julian had been in hospital with Anne. He hadn't come home and probably didn't even know I was in hospital, that I had been in hospital. I quickly packed my things. I threw away the photo from my bedside table and burned the love letters he'd written me. I took off my wedding ring and left it on the coffee table. When I was finished, I looked around the empty house. Felt the same as when we first moved in, cold and lifeless. I lowered my eyes to the divorce papers. I picked up a pen and signed my name on the back. Peered alone. Before I could call Julian to come home and sign the papers, when he came in, I was talking to a coworker about work. My colleague asked me about my flight and I replied, tomorrow afternoon. I hung up the phone. As soon as I saw him come through the door, he frowned. What's tomorrow afternoon? A prenatal checkup. I put my phone down and replied flatly, just work stuff, not a checkup. Then I noticed the food container in his hand. He met my gaze and handed it to me. I'm sorry, Scarlett. And has been in hospital for the past few days, and I haven't been able to leave her side. I bought you some fish soup to help you recover. I didn't take it because the faint smell of fish made me sick. We have been married for years, and he still doesn't know that I can't eat fish. How ironic, but I didn't even have the energy to argue. Oh right, this is Anne's silk dress. I can't put it in the washing machine. Can you hand wash it tonight? I suddenly had doubts. As I listened to these words and looked at the person in front of me, I didn't know if he had changed, or if I had always married someone like this. I said through clenched teeth, just leave it. I need to get some clothes to change into. Then I'll come back, he said. He quickly went into the bedroom to pack. I took the opportunity to go over to him with the divorce papers. Julian, our mortgages are all paid. I need your signature here. He didn't suspect a thing and signed his name. Without hesitation, I watched him leave with his bag of clothes. I booked a flight 2 hours later. I took off my wedding ring and I slipped off my wedding ring and put the divorce papers on the coffee table. They were the last things I wanted Julian to see. It was over between us. Nobody knew how long Anne had been in hospital. But Julian Bag's eyes were red from being up all night. He frowned at his unkempt appearance and pretended to be considerate. Julian, go back and rest for a few days so Sam can take over. Julian glanced at the empty chat window with Scarlett on his phone. He swallowed the words he wanted to say and remained silent. Real at times like this, Scarlett would throw a tantrum or blow up his phone with messages. Why was she so quiet this time? A feeling of unease crept into Julian's heart, and he went home to check things out. Just as he was about to leave, she grabbed his arm. Bruce? Julian, about the hospital bills for the next few days. She didn't finish her sentence. but Julian understood. He paid the fee with a sense of frustration, only to be told there were insufficient funds. How is that possible? He swiped his card several times, but he always got the same result. Finally, he checked with the bank and discovered that $14 was missing from his account. Julian knew something was wrong, so he raced home. In his car, he tried to tell himself that Scarlett was just mad at him. He opened the door, but there was none of the expected accusation or scolding. The silence was deafening, so quiet it felt eerie. Julian switched on the light and saw that the living room was unusually empty. He hurried into the bedroom and looked around. He realized that Scarlett's things were gone. The only thing left in the wardrobe was a bag of Anne's dirty laundry. Dirty laundry. He dialed her number with a shaking hand, but he only got a mechanical cold just in case. Abitau repays him. How could it be? His heart pounded painfully, as if it were being roasted over an open flame. Julian paced the house like a lost soul, but Scarlett was nowhere to be found. He picked up the documents and despaired. His eyes fell on the glaring words, "Coswell divorce agreement," with her signature on the last page. Julian stared intently at his signature. He remembered how quickly he had signed the papers that day, because he was worried about Anne. He had not looked at the details before signing. All he could think about at the time was Anne. Under the agreement was a thin medical record, an abortion document. When had Scarlett had the procedure? Suddenly a sharp, almost unbearable pain shot through his chest. It was as if each of these scratches was a deep, painful incision on his heart. He was bleeding profusely. There was also a tiny, simple ring next to the coffee table. He held it in his and sat helplessly in the dimly lit room, replaying memories in his mind. He bought that ring after getting frostbite from distributing leaflets in winter. It could also be considered her keepsake. Despite their many arguments and periods of silence, Charlotte never took it off. But now, by transferring the money from their joint account and leaving only the ring, she's made it that their relationship was definitely over. She wasn't coming back. Scarlett had been so kind and gentle. She married him without even asking for a proper wedding. What had he done in return? Julian's eyes turned bloodshot as the memories of his cruelty to her flooded back. His chest tightened and he clutched at his heart. He gasped for breath as tears streamed down his face. The phone rang and he grabbed it anxiously, but it wasn't Scarlett. Sam and Anne's voices came through. As he picked up the phone, Julian flew. The hospital said they would only cover the costs until tonight. The nurse just reminded us. Benson, have you paid for Julian yet? You should get some rest. If you've paid, Sam can stay up with me. We'll be fine. I'm Julian. Oh, and could you order us something to eat? The Wheats are starving. A wave of anger exploded in Julian's chest. His eyes darkened as Pyrie raged inside him. Harrow his silence. The voices on the other end pressed him again. Munger, get out, both of you, get out of my life. He shouted angrily, smashing his phone to pieces. When I first arrived at Westburg, I suffered sleepless nights from the heartbreak and difficulty adjusting to the new environment. I finally fell asleep. I dream of the first time I met Julian. It was when I had just graduated from college. I had gotten into a big fight with my family because we couldn't agree on my career plans, and they decided to cut me off financially. One day, I passed out in the freezing snow on my way to a part-time job. I hadn't eaten for a long time. When I opened my eyes, there was a boy in front of me. Verb, are you awake? His frown lifted and a smile immediately appeared on his face. I saw that you had fainted by the side of the road, so I took you to the hospital. Silhouetted against the light, a tall and graceful youth stood before me. A delicate shadow softened his attractive eyebrows and eyes. And the upward curve of his gave him a captivating look. He rummaged in his backpack and pulled out a takeaway container. The comforting smell of warm soup filled the air. As he opened it, he smiled at me. His eyes curved into crescents, and a dimple appeared on the right side of his lips. At that moment, I felt my cheeks flush. My heart pounded in my chest, and an indescribable feeling washed over me. After that day, I always sought him out. I made excuses to spend time with him. Little by little, the distance between us disappeared, and it was only natural that we ended up together. Every time I wake up in the middle of the night, I find myself crying uncontrollably. I stop sleeping to avoid the happy memories that keep me awake at night. That night, as a new employee, I had a lot of work to catch up on. I realized that could only overcome my shortcomings with hard work. I started working overtime and soon secured my first big deal. Big deal when I was walking home from the victory party. I saw someone I knew standing at the entrance to my block of flats. I was about to walk past when Julian grabbed my arm. He still looked the same, but there was an obvious weariness about him. His once clean-shaven face now had a faint stubble. There were dark circles under his eyes. His normally straight posture was slumped, as if the world had pulled him down. Weight had pulled him down. Mama Scarlett, he called my name, but his voice was deep and hoarse. Maps, it's my fault that I hurt you. I've severed all ties with those friends, and I want to start again with you. I promise to treat you and our child right. Can we do that now? He still thought we could put things back together. I couldn't help but laugh mockingly. So you do care about the baby I was carrying, Julian Elpo? I was already anemic from the pregnancy, but you forced me to give my blood to Anne. She deliberately spilled hot soup on the floor, and when I was scalded, you ran after her without looking back. You even pushed me to the floor so hard that shards of glass pierced my back. I missed you so much. Tears welled up in my eyes, and she missed you too. All the pain you've caused me. The words are endless. Do you think I could ever forgive you? I am so sorry, Scarlett. Foinky kept repeating these empty words, but there was nothing he could say to deny it. Everything I had said was the truth. Under the moonlight, our shadows were long and far apart. I clung to Julian's ridiculous promises for far too long, hurting myself again and again, to end up here. I tore my arm from his grip and stepped back, putting distance between us. Maybe, Scarlett, when did you have the abortion? His voice cracked as he asked the question. I was on the verge of breaking down completely. I smiled reassuringly and said nonchalantly, Mon Piale, right after I gave my blood to your precious Anne. You might also like this. I said each word calmly and deliberately, as if I was driving sharp knives into his heart. Much shone back. Then you stayed at her bedside for 3 days and 3 nights. I finally saw the pain in his face, but it wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. I was completely drained and just wanted to get away from him as fast as I could. Julian's face turned ashen, and he fell to his knees before me. Monstu, Scarlett, I've begged you. Please just give me one more chance. I will work hard. I will make up for everything. I will give you the big wedding you deserve. We can have another child and live a happy life together. Together, give birth to whatever you want. Looked at me with those deep, soulful eyes that I used to find irresistible. These eyes were slightly teary and red, but felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. Instead, they made my stomach churn with disgust. He leaned forward, pleading, but his desperation didn't move me. Monchi, Julian, weak, you are finished. To be honest, this should have ended a long time ago. I like every time you ignored how I felt. I shook my head and walked away without looking back. A few days later, I received a message from a friend. Enjoy a birth. Have you seen the video that is circulating online? She forwarded it to me immediately. Julian and Anne were the 2 characters that appeared. I clicked on the video. They were standing in a staircase. After a brief exchange of words, Julian's face was dark, and as he grabbed Anne by the neck, her tears ran down his hand. Her tears ran down his hand. But the man who once held her like a treasure now looked utterly distraught. Now looked utterly disturbed. Julian only released his grip when Anne began to choke. And began to choke and roll her eyes back. The unconscious Anne. I felt no pity. I suppressed an uncontrollable urge to laugh coldly. Julian had always treated her as if she were the most precious thing in his life. And now, with Christ to come to this, they only had themselves to blame. Because this group of friends had shielded Anne for so long, she had become used to it. Her hidden malice hurt me more than anyone else. Whenever she came to my house, they would and criticize me whenever I tried to explain myself. Eventually, Julian would bow his head and ignore my frantic as I looked to him for help. Sometimes he'd even join in and apologize, because Anne shed a tear before Julian could see me for the last time. He was arrested and remanded in custody. He was awaiting trial. Anne's injuries were serious. The fall had left her with one leg injured, that she would be unable to walk for the rest of her life. Nanley refused to settle. The once innocent and pure girl, distorted during the interview, as she demanded, but she couldn't afford a trial. Julian had paid all her previous medical bills. The gossip spread quickly, and Julian quickly found herself in the hot seat. Savon claimed to have the whole story. He anonymously posted everything about our relationship. Despite being married, Julian continued to protect his manipulative childhood friend. They were all a bad bunch, pretending to be close friends, while secretly pursuing more intimate relationships. The blog post instantly became the hottest topic online. As soon as it went live, the tide quickly turned against Anne. Even while she was in hospital, people whispered and pointed at her. The nurse looking after her would often make derogatory comments. As time went on, Anne couldn't cope with the stress and began acting very strangely. She seemed to have developed some mental health problems. Julian died and the divorce was finalized. The house we were living in was one that we had bought together. We paid off the mortgage every month. It was supposed to be ours officially this year, but we were already over. We visited Julian in prison to sort out the house ownership issue. It had only been a month since I had last seen him, but he looked like he'd aged years. He was much thinner. His complexion was pale, with hollow eyes and an unsteady gait. The once fiery gaze, with which I had been so infatuated, now reflected only Sten's exhaustion, like a burnt-out candle wick. Mostly I got the divorce papers. What are we going to do about the house? He was silent for a long time. A fleeting look of hope crossed his face, but it quickly disappeared. The house is in your name, sell it. You don't have to give me anything. That's right. He insisted on putting only my name on the deed. On the deed to make me feel more secure. His love for me was once sincere and passionate. Unfortunately, he had long forgotten the man he once was. I nodded quietly without adding anything. Sometimes I was grateful to have made a clean break. It made it easier to move on. Mrs. Carlett, as I turned to leave. His trembling voice stopped me. Matu, it's my fault. I am sorry I was wrong. I didn't care about your feelings. I brought all those friends into our home and let them boss you around without saying a word. He didn't stand up for you, although I wanted to. Sometimes I wanted to fight back. But Fulcanta, you were weak and useless. You can't even protect your own wife. I turned to him. I looked into his eyes with a mocking smile. You had so many opportunities to defend me, so many chances to make me stay. But you chose to do nothing and remain silent. Julian stood by whenever I was humiliated. He rejoiced or blamed me and sometimes joined in. He hurt me more than anyone. Monster Julian, you don't deserve to be my husband, or the father of my child. I turned and walked away. His screams and pains echoed behind me, but I never looked back. When I returned to Westburg, I dove headfirst into my hectic work schedule. Work at headquarters was fast and demanding, but it was also more fulfilling. I worked late into the night every day, so much so that I didn't have time to think about anything else. Once I got a call from a friend in Norway. She told me that El Patton had refused to settle, and she was actually suing Julian. Julian didn't deny that he had intentionally caused damage, but he insisted that she pay back all the money he had lent her, which of course and couldn't afford. And now they are at each other's throats. Matrodon on top of that. And her mental state is getting worse and worse. Sometimes she's normal, but then she loses it completely. She is hardly able to recognize anyone. The people who used to be around her have long since run as far away as they could. I couldn't help but sigh when I heard that, but it is also what they deserve. I used to think their friendship was unbreakable, but it was built on Julian's money. Everything crumbled into nothing the moment a gust of wind blew. Time flew, and before I knew it, the end of the year had come. The project team I led exceeded all expectations, and everyone got 10 well-deserved bonuses. At the annual company meeting, the vice president invited me up on stage to give a speech and motivate the team. I was alone on the stage. Then the soft glow, flickering lights, and the clinking of glasses. The crowd of colleagues cheered and applauded, their faces glowing with warmth. I was just a little more than a housewife 6 months ago, building my life around one man, only to be left bruised and battered by him, in a circle of people. Now I sit here having found my purpose and direction in life. My eyes well up as I take the microphone. Miss D, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I will work even harder in the future and strive to bring more benefits to the company. From now on, I will shine for myself. I will grow strong like the evergreen pine, standing tall no matter what. The company car dropped me off at my apartment building. I took my time walking home, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 6 months. It was late at night. The streets were empty, few people coming and going. Suddenly I felt a cool breeze on my cheek and looked up. The sky was dark, and the night wind was carrying fine snow from the sky. A gentle chill swept over me as the snowflakes danced merrily in the breeze. The breeze had finally arrived. I smiled to myself and felt my steps lighten. With hope as my guiding star, I truly believed that my life would get better. I would turn my faith into the courage needed to chase my dreams, to create a dazzling narrative where I was the heroine of my own destiny.